You wake up, you stretch, you check your phone. Congratulations, you're free. Free to scroll endlessly, free to choose between 100 brands of cereal, free to post a picture that looks like you're happy, even if you're not. But are you really free? Or is your freedom just a well-crafted illusion? Because if you think about it, what we call freedom might be nothing more than a carefully designed box, a playground with invisible fences. You run around believing you're in control, when in reality, the walls were built long before you arrived. Today, we're going to peel back the curtain. We're going to expose how society, governments, corporations, culture itself controls you, how your freedom is shaped, manipulated, and in many ways entirely manufactured. And don't worry, it won't all be doom and gloom. We'll sprinkle in some humor. Because hey, if you're going to realize you're a puppet on strings, you might as well laugh a little before crying yourself to sleep. So sit back, unplug from the matrix, and let's explore the illusion of freedom. They tell us that freedom is all about choice. Choice of what to buy, what to wear, what to watch, who to vote for, and how to live. On the surface, it feels empowering. Walk into a supermarket and you're met with endless rows of cereal boxes, different shapes, flavors, mascots, and slogans, all screaming for attention. Swipe through your phone and you'll find hundreds of apps, each promising to make life more fun, more productive, more connected. Scroll through streaming platforms and you could spend hours just deciding what show to watch. All of this abundance convinces us that we are freer than any generation before us. We've been told that choice itself is freedom, that having 100 options means we are in control. But when you look closer, the myth begins to crumble. Most of these choices aren't really choices at all. They're variations within the same system, controlled by the same handful of corporations or institutions. Whether you buy Coke or Pepsi, the profits flow into different pockets of the same industry. Whether you shop at one fast fashion chain or another, the clothing is still made under similar exploitative conditions. Even your daily decisions about what to eat, wear, or consume are made within the narrow menu society presents. And here's the thing. Nobody asked if you wanted that menu in the first place. Nobody gave you the chance to write it. You were born into a world where the structure of choice was already pre-designed, and you've been conditioned to see that limited menu as infinite freedom. This illusion works because it distracts us. A magician doesn't need to chain your hands. He only needs to keep your eyes busy, while the real trick happens elsewhere. Society works in the same way. While you debate whether to buy an iPhone or an Android, the bigger decisions, the ones that truly shape your life, are made behind closed doors. You don't get to vote on whether money should dictate survival. You don't get to choose whether housing should be a commodity or a human right. You don't get to decide if the education system molds students into creative thinkers or obedient workers. Those choices were made for you, long before you even knew what freedom meant. The most dangerous part of this illusion is how natural it feels. Because you are presented with endless options, you assume autonomy. You assume that flipping between brands or parties or platforms means you're exercising power. But this is like a child running around a playground, convinced the world is vast, never realizing that the fence was deliberately built to keep them in. The sense of control is intoxicating, but the control itself is manufactured. Look at politics, for example. The system celebrates democracy as the ultimate expression of freedom because you get to choose your leaders. But in reality, your choices are almost always narrowed to a binary, two sides of the same coin, both funded and influenced by the same interests. The boundaries of debate are carefully policed. You can argue about tax rates, healthcare plans, or foreign policies, but questioning the deeper structures, the existence of the system itself, is rarely on the ballot. You're allowed to pick the color of the curtain, but not to ask what's behind it. The myth of choice keeps people invested in the system. As long as you're busy picking between brands, shows, or political candidates, you won't notice the invisible architecture guiding your decisions. It gives just enough variation to make you feel independent, while ensuring that the underlying machinery of society remains untouched. And perhaps that is the greatest trick of all, convincing people that they are free simply because they are allowed to pick their flavor of cage. Imagine for a moment that life is a giant board game. You didn't sign up to play, you were simply born onto the board, and the rules were handed to you before you could even read them. At first, they look harmless enough: stop at red lights, don't talk with your mouth full, raise your hand before speaking in class. But then the rules multiply. Wear these clothes to be considered professional, get this kind of degree to be considered successful, work these hours to be seen as responsible. And you don't remember anyone asking you if you agreed to any of this. The rules were already in place, etched into the collective imagination long before you had the chance to develop one of your own. What makes these rules so fascinating and slightly terrifying is that they rarely feel like rules. They feel like reality. You don't need a police officer shouting at you to wear a suit to a job interview, because society has already whispered in your ear since childhood that doing otherwise would be social suicide. You don't need a law mandating that you smile at strangers in an elevator, because something in you already panics if you don't. And if you try to resist, if you show up barefoot at the office, or question why a career ladder is even a thing, you just get quietly pushed out of the circle of normal. The punishment isn't prison bars, it's raised eyebrows, awkward silences, maybe even your mother sighing dramatically over Thanksgiving dinner. That's the beauty of invisible rules. They don't have to be enforced because they live inside you. They're coded into your habits, your fears, your desires. Culture is the operating system of the human mind, and most of us never realize we're running on autopilot. Why does sitting in a fluorescent-lit cubicle for 8 hours a day seem like a sensible way to spend most of your waking life? Why is success defined by a mortgage, a car payment, and maybe a vacation to the same overcrowded resort everyone else goes to? None of these things are natural. They're not written in the DNA of our species. They're conventions. Software upgrades installed without your consent. And here's where the humor comes in. You've been playing along your whole life thinking you're an independent, rebellious soul, when really you're just following the script with minor variations. The edgy person who gets tattoos and listens to punk music, still operating within a cultural framework that tells them rebellion looks like ink and leather jackets. The intellectual who brags about never owning a TV, still performing according to a script, only this time it's the I'm above mass entertainment rulebook. Even the non-conformists are conforming, just to different invisible rules. It's almost funny if it weren't so tragic. But the real trick isn't just that the rules are invisible, it's that you think they're your own ideas. You tell yourself you want that promotion, that car, that ring on your finger, without ever asking whether those desires were planted in you like seeds. You don't realize that much of what you call common sense is really cultural sense, passed down through repetition, advertising, and peer pressure. And the moment you start to pull on that thread, questioning why things are the way they are, you feel the weight of the social machinery pushing back. Because nothing threatens a system more than someone who sees through its rules. The irony is that the people who seem most free are often the ones most tightly bound. The high-powered executive in a tailored suit, supposedly at the top of society's ladder, is often the most enslaved by those invisible rules. They can't dress how they like, say what they like, or live how they like without risking the empire they've built. The real rebels aren't the ones shouting slogans or dyeing their hair neon green. They're the quiet few who dare to ask, why does this rule exist in the first place? But those people are rare and often dismissed as weirdos, dreamers, or lunatics. A true brilliance of these unwritten laws is that they trick you into policing yourself. There doesn't need to be an authority figure looming over your shoulder when everyone around you, your friends, co-workers, neighbors, becomes the authority. They raise an eyebrow, they laugh nervously, they question your choices, and suddenly you've been nudged back in line without even realizing it. You don't obey because you're forced to. You obey because you're terrified of being left out. That is control in its purest form, when the cage doesn't even need a lock because you've already convinced yourself it's safer inside. Work. The word alone carries weight, like a stone dropped into the pit of your stomach on a Sunday night. From the very beginning, you've been told that work is noble, that it builds character, that it gives your life meaning. Society wraps the concept in glittering slogans. Hard work pays off. Do what you love. Rise and grind. It sounds inspiring, almost poetic, but peel back the motivational posters, and the reality isn't quite so romantic. Most people don't work because they've discovered a burning passion for filling spreadsheets, flipping burgers, or answering customer complaints. They work because if they don't, the bills don't get paid, the rent doesn't clear, and the fridge stays empty. In other words, what we call work is less about self-fulfillment and more about survival. Think about how strange this is. You're told you're free, yet from the moment you enter adulthood, your freedom comes with a catch. Find the job or face the abyss. If you choose not to work, it's not that you get to lounge around living a bohemian dream. No, you face eviction notices, hunger, and the cold stare of a bank account gasping for air. That doesn't sound like freedom. It sounds suspiciously like coercion wrapped in a necktie. Imagine being told you're free to swim anywhere you like, but if you stop swimming, you'll drown. That's not choice, that's survival with a marketing campaign. And let's not forget the absurd rituals surrounding work. 40 hours a week, 5 days straight, often doing tasks so mind-numbing they could be replaced by a competent raccoon. We sit under fluorescent lights, sipping lukewarm coffee, pretending to care about quarterly reports, while secretly Googling vacations we'll never take. Then, at the end of it all, we get a paycheck, most of which immediately disappears into rent, utilities, taxes, and debt. It's the world's most elaborate hamster wheel, and the strangest part is how proud we are of running on it. We slap slogans on coffee mugs. TGIF, Mondays suck. We bond with coworkers over shared misery, as though mutual suffering somehow makes it noble. Of course, society tells us that work isn't just about money, it's about dignity. The unemployed are painted as lazy, unworthy failures. Never mind that the system itself requires unemployment to function, that not everyone can have a job at the same time. The stigma is what keeps people terrified of stepping off the treadmill. Better to be exhausted and drained than to wear the scarlet letter of joblessness. And so, we keep playing along, clinging to the illusion that our worth is measured by productivity. The real irony is at the top of the ladder. The people who work the hardest, physically, mentally, emotionally, are often the ones earning the least. Nurses pulling 12-hour shifts, janitors scrubbing floors at midnight, delivery drivers racing against impossible schedules. Meanwhile, the higher up you go, the less work seems to resemble work at all. CEOs earn millions for making decisions that others execute. Politicians collect salaries and donations for speeches filled with recycled slogans. Billionaires make money in their sleep through investments, while the rest of us lie awake wondering how to pay next month's bills. If work is such a sacred source of dignity, why does the system reward those who barely seem to do it? This is where the mythology of work gets really dark. From childhood, we're taught to dream about careers. What do you want to be when you grow up? Becomes less of a question and more of a command. You're funneled into schools, trained to sit still, memorize facts, and obey authority. All skills designed not to unleash creativity, but to prepare you for the workplace. By the time you reach adulthood, you've been conditioned to accept the grind as natural. Questioning it feels absurd, even dangerous. After all, what else would you do? How else would you survive? That's the brilliance of the system. It convinces you that labor is life itself, that without work, you are nothing. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The moment you stop being useful, the system no longer cares. Get sick, grow old, burn out, and you're swiftly discarded. You were never valued as a person, only as a unit of productivity. When you were profitable, you were celebrated. When you're not, you're forgotten. And yet, despite this cruel reality, the narrative persists. Work gives life purpose. Work sets you free. Work makes you whole. It's one of the greatest illusions of modern society, and the most tragic part is how enthusiastically we keep selling it to ourselves. Desire is the easiest leash to wear, because it doesn't feel like a leash at all. In fact, it feels exciting. Society doesn't need chains or guards when it can dangle shiny objects in front of you and watch you run toward them willingly. From the moment you're old enough to stare at a glowing screen, the system whispers that happiness is out there, waiting in the form of the next purchase. A new phone, sleeker than the one you bought last year. A pair of shoes that promise confidence, status, maybe even love. A car that isn't just transportation but a moving billboard of your worth. Every advertisement, every influencer post, every glossy magazine cover is designed to make you believe you are always one step away from completeness if only you'd buy the right thing. The trick, of course, is that the finish line never arrives. The moment you acquire what you thought you needed, desire recalibrates. You get the phone, but now the laptop looks outdated. You buy the car, but then the newer model rolls out with one extra cup holder and a slightly shinier paint job. It's like running a marathon where the organizers keep moving the finish line forward every time you get close. You never stop running because you've been convinced the next mile will finally bring satisfaction. But it doesn't. It can't. Because the goal was never to satisfy you. It was to keep you chasing. There's something almost comedic about it. Imagine a mouse sprinting on a wheel, convinced that just one more rotation will get it out of the cage. That's us, only instead of a wheel, it's Amazon Prime boxes and Instagram ads. And we laugh at the absurdity of it, but only for a moment before we open our wallets and fall right back into the cycle. It's control dressed up as fun, and we're the ones paying for the privilege. What makes desire such a powerful tool of control is how personal it feels. Unlike rules or laws, which come from outside, desire feels like it comes from within. You don't think the system wants me to want this. You think I want this. That's the genius of it. The programming works best when it hides itself. And because everyone else is chasing the same desires, the pressure multiplies. It's not just ads telling you what to buy, it's your friends, your coworkers, the strangers on social media flaunting the illusion of a better life. You see them traveling, dining, wearing, driving, and suddenly your own life feels insufficient. You're not buying because you need, you're buying to catch up. And let's not pretend desire stops at objects. It extends to lifestyles, identities, even personalities. Want to be the adventurous traveler? Buy plane tickets and a GoPro. Want to be the intellectual? Buy the right books, drink craft coffee, post contemplative quotes on your story. Want to be the health guru? Buy supplements, fitness gear, and whatever bizarre powder influencers are mixing into their smoothies this week. The system is brilliant at packaging entire identities into marketable products. You're not just buying sneakers, you're buying athleticism. You're not just buying clothes, you're buying confidence. You're not just buying a vacation, you're buying happiness. And here's where the illusion becomes sinister, because the more you chase desire, the less you notice the bars of the cage. You don't feel trapped, because you're too busy redecorating the cell with all the shiny things you've acquired. You call it freedom, because nobody forced you to buy the new gadget. You chose it. You chose the flavor of bait you wanted. But the fact that you were always hungry, hunger was carefully designed. The system doesn't need to push you when it can simply pull you along with your own cravings. It's a kind of control that's almost invisible, and that's what makes it terrifying. If someone put you in chains, you'd notice immediately. You'd resist. But when they give you endless desires to chase, you not only comply, you thank them for it. You call it progress, you call it lifestyle, you call it freedom. But all along, it's just the same wheel, spinning endlessly, while you run faster and faster, hoping the next lap will finally feel like liberation. Attention is the new currency, and society spends it on your behalf before you even know you had any. Every morning you wake up, glance at your phone, and within seconds the flood begins. Headlines screaming for urgency, notifications demanding your eyes, endless feeds whispering, "Stay with me just a little longer." You think you're casually browsing, but in truth you've entered the most competitive marketplace on earth, the war for your focus. And the weapons? Outrage, fear, spectacle, and the irresistible dopamine drip of novelty. The old saying was knowledge is power. Today, it's more accurate to say control of attention is power. Whoever directs your gaze directs your reality. Consider the news. It doesn't need to tell you what to think, it simply tells you what to think about. If the lead story tonight is a scandal in politics, you'll believe politics is burning down. If it's a story about the economy, you'll believe money is all that matters. And if the story is about a celebrity's haircut, well, you'll still talk about it over coffee tomorrow, because your attention was drafted into service. Think about how absurd this is. There are billions of events happening on this planet every single day, yet the media plucks out a handful and says, "Here, this is reality." and because the news is loud, polished, and authoritative, you believe them. Not consciously, of course. You roll your eyes and say, I don't trust the media, but you still find yourself talking about the same stories, shaping your worldview around the same narratives, and debating the same issues that were curated for you like items on a pre-selected menu. Then there's social media, the slicker, faster, and infinitely more addictive sibling of traditional news. At least television news had the decency to stop when the broadcast ended. Social media never sleeps. It's a slot machine in your pocket, always ready to give you just enough to keep pulling the lever. The algorithms are not designed to show you truth. They're designed to show you what keeps you scrolling. Outrage, conflict, cute animals, thirst traps, conspiracy theories. It doesn't matter as long as it hijacks your brain chemistry. And the best part for the system? You think you're in control. You believe you're choosing what to watch, when in reality, you're being led by invisible puppeteers whose only goal is to maximize your engagement, a word that sounds warm and friendly until you realize it's synonymous with addiction. The result is that entire populations begin to see the world not as it is, but as it is presented. Wars are framed as noble crusades or barbaric atrocities depending on who controls the cameras. Billionaires are framed as visionaries saving humanity rather than monopolists hoarding resources. Even rebellion itself is packaged, branded, and sold back to you in a form that won't threaten the status quo. That is the brilliance of media control. You can feel rebellious while still playing perfectly into the system's hand. You can rage online, share hashtags, boycott a brand for exactly 3 weeks, and still contribute to the same machine you thought you were resisting. And while we like to imagine ourselves as savvy, media-literate citizens who see through the lies, most of us still end up parroting the narratives we've absorbed. It's not entirely our fault. When billions of people are immersed in the same stream of information, it's nearly impossible to step out of it. Try having a conversation without referencing the latest headline, the trending video, the viral meme. Silence fills the air because so much of what we consider conversation is actually regurgitation. The illusion is complete when you start mistaking those borrowed ideas for your own. The scary part isn't just that your attention is controlled. It's that your sense of reality is built from that control. What you fear, what you desire, what you think is possible, all of it is filtered through layers of curated information. If a tree falls in the forest and no one films it, did it really happen? In the age of media, the answer is no. Reality exists only if it trends. And in a world where the loudest voices drown out the truest ones, your freedom of thought becomes a carefully edited playlist, looping endlessly, while you keep dancing to the tune you didn't even choose. The most powerful warden of the human spirit isn't the government or the corporation, it's other people. You could live in a society with the loosest laws imaginable, but if you dare step outside the invisible boundaries of social expectation, you'll quickly discover just how unforgiving the cage of community can be. Humans crave belonging the way plants crave sunlight. We want to be seen, accepted, and validated, which means the threat of being cast out, mocked, shunned, or simply whispered about at the family dinner table is enough to make us march in perfect formation. No guardrails required. Think about it. No one officially mandates how you should dress, but wear pajamas to a board meeting and watch the temperature of the room drop 10 degrees. There's no law dictating how you should laugh, but try cackling like a movie villain at a funeral and see how quickly you're reclassified from quirky to psychopath. Even in the smallest details. What music you like, what slang you use, how you decorate your apartment. There's an unspoken audience watching, scoring, and gently nudging you back toward the middle. The irony is that you're both prisoner and prison guard. You censor yourself to avoid embarrassment, but you also quietly enforce the rules on others. Every side eye, every chuckle, every really, you're into that, is a tiny electric shock reminding people to stay in line. And it doesn't stop at surface-level quirks. Social control runs deep, shaping life's biggest decisions. You might choose a career path not because you love it, but because it's the kind of job that impresses at reunions. You might get married not because you're ready, but because everyone else is doing it, and you don't want to be the last one at the table for Thanksgiving. Even your opinions, those cherished, fiery beliefs you think you came up with yourself, are often shaped by the tribe around you. You laugh at their jokes, adopt their stances, and sometimes even fake outrage just to belong. It's peer pressure dressed up as personal conviction. There's a kind of dark comedy in watching how far people will go to avoid being the outlier. Imagine a room where everyone is standing for no reason. You walk in, confused, but eventually you stand too. Not because you believe in standing, but because sitting feels unbearable when all eyes are on you. Society works exactly like that room, only the rules are harder to spot and the stakes feel infinitely higher. Nonconformity isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. People lose jobs, friends, reputations, even families for stepping too far outside the accepted script. That's why most rebellion comes in safe doses. Dye your hair, buy ripped jeans, maybe rant online about something everyone already agrees is bad. These small acts of resistance are tolerated because they don't threaten the deeper consensus. What makes the social cage so effective is its invisibility. You don't realize how often you're performing until you try not to. Try staying silent in a group conversation and notice how itchy the air feels. Try disagreeing with everyone at the dinner table and see how quickly you're either ignored or interrogated until you give in. The cage doesn't have bars because it doesn't need them. The fear of exclusion is enough to keep you neatly inside, polishing your performance for the crowd. And since everyone else is also performing, the illusion of freedom is sustained. You're not being forced to conform, you're choosing it. Or at least, that's what you tell yourself to sleep at night. The cruelest twist is that this cage shapes not only what you do, but who you believe you are. Most people never discover their authentic selves because they've spent their entire lives molding themselves into socially acceptable versions. It's not that you're hiding the real you, it's that you may not even know who that is. Years of subtle correction, praise for fitting in, shame for standing out, and the constant buzz of other people's expectations sculpts a personality that feels natural, but is really a performance rehearsed for decades. And the moment you try to improvise, the audience coughs disapprovingly and you forget your lines. That's how deep the cage runs. It convinces you that the role you play is the person you are. Freedom is the word everyone loves to toss around, like a shiny coin flipped into the air, but few ever stop to ask what it really means. For some, freedom is doing whatever you want, whenever you want, with nobody telling you otherwise. For others, it's the right to choose between options society graciously provides, as if picking from a fast food menu is the pinnacle of human autonomy. The truth, uncomfortable as it is that absolute freedom doesn't exist. You can't escape every rule, every influence, every system. You're born into structures, language, culture, money, laws, and no amount of screaming into the void will erase them. Even if you move to a deserted island, you'd still be bound by nature, by hunger, by weather, by the biological needs of your body. The fantasy of perfect freedom is just that, a fantasy. But here's where it gets interesting. Just because you can't be free from everything doesn't mean you can't be freer than you are now. The secret isn't in running away from society, but in becoming aware of it. Freedom begins with noticing the strings. You might not be able to cut them all, but you can decide how to dance. When you recognize that your choices are shaped by advertising, you can pause before handing over your wallet. When you see that your opinions are shaped by headlines, you can question whether they're really yours. When you feel the weight of social pressure, you can ask yourself if conformity is worth the cost. Awareness doesn't erase control, but it blunts its edge. It gives you the smallest yet most powerful form of rebellion. The ability to choose when to play along and when to step off stage. Of course, this awareness comes with a price. Once you start seeing the illusion, you can't unsee it. The world doesn't feel as simple anymore. The commercials that once looked harmless now feel manipulative. The traditions that once felt sacred now seem suspiciously convenient for those in power. Even the little routines, work, shopping, scrolling, suddenly feel like pieces of a giant script you never agreed to perform. And yes, it can be depressing at first. Nobody likes realizing they've been a background actor in someone else's play, but if you sit with that discomfort long enough, it transforms into something else. It becomes power. Because the person who sees the illusion can't be manipulated as easily as the one who doesn't. You're no longer dragged along blindly by every new desire, every new outrage, every new rule. Instead, you get to choose your moments of compliance. Sometimes you'll play the game, pay your taxes, smile at the boss, post the holiday photos, because it's easier. Other times you'll quietly step aside, refusing to let the system define every part of you. Maybe you won't buy into the idea that career equals identity. Maybe you'll reject the notion that love must look like the fairy tales sold in movies. Maybe you'll find joy not in consumption, but in creation, in silence, in experiences that can't be marketed. That kind of freedom may not be absolute, but it's real enough to taste. And there's something almost humorous about how fragile the illusion becomes once you've seen it. Billboards stop looking glamorous and start looking desperate. Influencers stop looking enviable and start looking like salespeople with better lighting. The loudest voices in politics start sounding like actors auditioning for a role you never asked them to play. The comedy is that the system doesn't actually change, you do. The strings are still there, the cage is still there, but once you know they exist, you stop mistaking them for the horizon. You stop mistaking the script for the truth. So no, you will never achieve perfect, infinite freedom, the kind philosophers write about in dusty books. But you can achieve something more practical, more grounded, and arguably more valuable. The freedom of awareness. The freedom of questioning. The freedom of choosing consciously instead of drifting unconsciously. It may not be the kind of freedom that sells well on posters or campaign slogans, but it's the kind of freedom that matters. The kind that lets you look at the world with all its illusions and finally, quietly laugh. So, are you free? Well, that depends. If freedom means doing whatever you want, whenever you want, then no. Society has its claws deep in you, always has, always will. But if freedom means understanding the game, seeing the invisible rules, and daring to question them, then yes, you can be freer than most. The illusion of freedom is powerful, but illusions only work when you don't know they're illusions. Once you see through them, they lose their magic. So next time you pick between Coke and Pepsi, next time you vote, next time you scroll, pause, ask yourself, is this really my choice? Or is it the choice they want me to make? Because the greatest act of freedom you can perform is to start questioning. Fade to black. Soft whisper. After all, a bird born in a cage doesn't know it's a cage until it tries to fly,